The car was still there. The papers were still there. The wallet was still there. Only Michelle was gone. And for 40 years, no one has known why. On August the 2nd, 1978, Michelle Ellis, a 23-year-old living in Indianapolis, Indiana, left home early in the morning. She was an art student, once a model, and had worked as a cashier, a young woman searching for her future. She never came back. Her car was found just an hour later, out of gas. The driver's door was locked, the passenger side left, open. Inside were her wallet, her identification, her credits, cards, and no sign of a struggle. From that moment on, Michelle Ellis vanished. No explanation. No arrests. Not a single credible lead. Michelle Ellis was born in 1955, the daughter of an African-American family in Indianapolis, Indiana. She grew up in a modest community where family values, resilience, and hard work were held above all else. Those who knew Michelle described her as quiet and xiao, introspective but never withdrawn. She had a way of observing the world with a keen, thoughtful gaze, a gift her friends believed was what led her to art. Her family wasn't wealthy, but they did everything they could to give her the best chance to learn and grow. Michelle knew that. She never took the opportunities she had for granted. Every day, she worked to make sure she honored the people who loved her. By the time she turned 20, Michelle was attending the Heron School of Art, Balasape, Indiana-Purdue University, one of the state's most respected art programs. There, she learned not only how to paint and sculpt, but also how to tell stories through images. Classmates remembered how she could sit for hours at her easel, lost in her own world. She wasn't the loud, party-going type, but anyone who spent time with Michelle could feel a quiet strength about her, the kind that drew respect, not pity. Outside of school, Michelle worked part-time as an art model for figure drawing classes and occasionally helped out at a Sears store. With her balanced frame, gentle height, and strikingly harmonious features, she was often asked to pose for anatomy studies. The work helped her cover tuition and made her feel she was giving back to the creative community she loved. But just days before she disappeared, Michelle quit her job at Sears, a small detail that deeply unsettled her parents. Her mother recalled that Michelle never gave a clear reason, only saying, "I just want to take a break and focus on something else." For someone as deliberate and planned as Michelle, this sudden change left a lingering question in her family's minds. In the summer of 1978, at the time she vanished, Michelle was living with her family. She wasn't in a serious relationship, and no one knew of any conflicts in her life. In the days before she went missing, she behaved exactly as she always had, calm, steady, without signs of worry or distress. Friends and family described her as private about personal matters, but never secretive in a way that seemed troubling. That's what made her disappearance so baffling. A young woman with no disputes, no known dangers, no signs of depression or intent to leave, suddenly gone, as if she had never existed at all. Michelle's family, especially her mother, never believed she left willingly, and if something happened to her, they felt it must have happened quickly, so quickly that no one saw or heard a thing. But perhaps the most heartbreaking part for her mother wasn't the uncertainty, it was the silence. A silence that has lasted for decades in a crowded city among millions of footsteps with no trace, no voice, no sign from Michelle at all. On the morning of August 2nd, 1978, Michelle Ellis left home around 8 a.m. The skies over Indianapolis were lightly sunny. Summer air, warm with a touch of heaviness, but otherwise calm. No one knew exactly where she was headed. She left no note, made no mention to her family, and had no set plans for the day. It was a morning like any other, and that perhaps is why no one suspected that something unusual was waiting ahead. About an hour after Michelle left, police received a call about an abandoned car along Fall Creek Parkway, spot well known to locals. It was a 1973 red Oldsmobile Omega, Michelle's car. It was parked on the roadside, completely out of gas. The driver's door was locked. The passenger side, however, was left open. Inside, everything was untouched. Her wallet, identification, credit cards, checkbook, $2 in, cash, and her purse, all neatly in place. No signs of a struggle, no sign of theft, as if the owner had stepped away for just a moment and never returned. Michelle's family was notified soon after. They rushed to the scene, hoping to find a clue, an explanation, or at the very least, a direction to search. But there was nothing. No witnesses had seen her near the car. No surveillance cameras existed in that area at the time. No footprints, no sounds, no trace at all. The disappearance had happened too quickly and far too quietly. Early investigators wondered, had Michelle walked off to look for a gas station? Did someone stop to give her a ride? Or, far worse, had someone taken advantage of a moment when she was alone and pulled her into something terrible? There was no evidence to confirm any theory. Her car became a silent marker, a reminder that someone had once stood there and then was gone without a trace. Her family began their own search. Michelle's mother put up flyers on lampposts, stopped by every gas station in the area, asked the homeless, shop clerks, anyone who might have seen her that morning. But the only answers she received were sympathetic, shakes of the head. A sense of helplessness, despair, and invisibility began to swallow the Ellis family, not only because they had lost their daughter, but because it felt as though no one else truly cared. The case was reported to police, but it wasn't immediately treated as a dangerous missing persons situation. At the time, Michelle was 23 years old, a legal adult. Police initially suggested she might have left of her own accord, that this wasn't necessarily a serious disappearance, but her family knew better. Michelle would never have done that. They knew their daughter, and they knew something was very, very wrong. When police officially began their investigation, they had almost nothing to go on besides the abandoned car. No direct witnesses came forward. No security footage existed showing Michelle leaving her vehicle or being approached by anyone. In 1978, surveillance technology was limited, especially in residential areas without much commercial activity. Instead of a chain of evidence leading toward answers, Michelle's case was a chain of empty spaces, and those empty spaces weighed heavier on her family than anything else. Maybe someone had seen something. Maybe a passerby noticed her car and sensed something was wrong. But if they did, they never spoke up. Or worse, no one listened. Meanwhile, Michelle's family kept searching in their own way. They called other police precincts, hospitals, morgues, even women's shelters. Anywhere that offered the faintest hope, they went. But every door remained closed. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't break through the wall of silence surrounding her disappearance. In an interview, Michelle's mother once said she didn't just feel the loss of her daughter, she felt the loss of faith that if someone disappeared, others outside the family would speak up, that the community would rally to find them. But that didn't happen. Michelle's story faded quietly into the background. And that, perhaps, was the most painful part. During the initial investigation, no official suspects were identified. A few old acquaintances were questioned, but none had any clear link to her disappearance. Several former classmates had moved out of the area. The most recent ex-boyfriend had long since ended their relationship and was no longer in contact. There was no evidence that Michelle had been threatened, stalked, or harassed. She left behind no suicide note, no diary entries, no signs of personal crisis. Possible leads dried up, and although police never said it outright, the pace of the investigation slowed. As with many missing person cases, without a breakthrough in those first crucial weeks, it quickly slipped into unsolved status, a term that sounds temporary but often stretches on forever. Then, a seemingly small detail brought the case back into focus. A coworker from Michelle's days at the Sears store recalled that in the final weeks before she quit, Michelle had seemed restless, often glancing at the clock. She never said anything specific, but whenever someone, especially a stranger, walked into the store, her eyes carried a wariness that hadn't been there before. At the time, the coworker assumed she was stressed about school or simply tired. But After learning of her disappearance, they couldn't shake the feeling that maybe Michelle had sensed something. Still, nothing was certain. Even that detail didn't lead to any concrete clues, but it strengthened her family's belief. Michelle did not leave willingly. Something had happened, silently, swiftly, and without a trace. And if no one paid attention to those small signs, then perhaps Michelle wasn't the only one who could be forgotten. Nearly 2 years after Michelle disappeared, a case that seemed destined to fade from memory was suddenly pulled back into the spotlight, not because of a new discovery or a breakthrough in evidence, but because of a strange phone call. On December 11th, 1980, the Ellis family received a call from unfamiliar number. When Michelle's mother picked up, a woman's voice whispered just 3 words. "This is Michelle." Then the line went dead. In those few seconds, there was no time to respond, no time to ask questions. The silence that followed the click of the receiver seemed to echo through the room like a curse. Was it truly Michelle? If it was, why didn't she say more? If it wasn't, who would do something so cruel? Police tried to trace the call, but in 1980, technology simply wasn't advanced enough to identify the caller or where it came from. There were no further leads. To outsiders, it was nothing more than a fleeting call. But to the Ellis family, it was an earthquake. Michelle's mother believed without doubt that it was her daughter, not only because of a mother's instinct, but because there was something in that voice. A fear, a plea that couldn't quite form into words. From that day on, every phone call in the Ellis home was answered with a deep, nervous hope. Every ring was a chance for joy, or heartbreak. The call revived a pain that had just begun to dull. It answered nothing, but it raised new questions. If Michelle was alive in 1980, where had she been for the past 2 years? Who had kept her, and why could she only speak 3 words? No one had the answers. But the simple fact that her voice might still exist was enough to pull Michelle's case out of the shadows, at least for a short while. The family launched a new campaign, hoping someone who knew Michelle's voice might recognize it through a recreated audio clip. They appeared on local television, sharing the details of the call. But like every lead before, it all fell back into silence. The question of the caller's identity was never solved, and Michelle, if it truly was her, slipped once again into the invisible void of the missing. After that call, the Ellis family lived in a constant tug of war between hope and helplessness. The questions piled up, but life still had to move forward. Michelle's parents went to work, paid bills, kept the routines of daily life, but inside they were shattered. Life never felt whole again when someone so vital had been torn away without a note, without a goodbye. Time became a strange place for them. Every passing season felt incomplete, and every holiday carried the weight of her absence. A year later, the family received an anonymous letter. Inside the envelope were just a few lines, handwritten. In blue ink, unsigned, "She's not far. Look again, near where the river bends." Police dusted the envelope for fingerprints, but found nothing. They organized a search along the White River near a bend close to Fall Creek Parkway, the very area where Michelle's car had been abandoned. But the search turned up nothing. No evidence. No Michelle. Once again, hope flared and quickly died out. The family began to fear that someone might be playing a cruel game. But there was another, more unsettling possibility. That people who knew the truth didn't want Michelle to be found. If she had been held, threatened, or harmed, then her calling home could have been a danger to someone. And if that person had the power to control her, silencing Michelle forever would not have been impossible. There was no proof of this, but the shadow of interference from one person or maybe more began to haunt those who loved her. By the 3rd year after her disappearance, another small, late detail surfaced. A librarian at Michelle's university recalled that in the weeks before she vanished, Michelle had checked out a book on identity and privacy. It was strange. That subject wasn't part of her regular coursework. That led to a troubling question. Had she been looking into ways to change her identity and leave on her own? Or was she searching for a way to escape someone, a situation she couldn't speak about? The family dismissed the first idea immediately, but with no other leads, police noted it as a possibility. The phone call, the anonymous letter, the subtle changes in behavior. None of it fit into a clear logical chain, but laid side by side, they painted a blurred picture. Michelle may have been trying to find her way back, or at least leave a trail, but something stopped her mid-journey. And if that's true, then what or who made sure that journey would never be finished? By the 5th year, after Michelle's disappearance, a new kind of exhaustion had settled over her family, the exhaustion of hope. What had once been sparks of light, a phone call, and anonymous letter, a cryptic library record, had become lingering ghosts. Every detail seemed important, yet none of them led to the truth. Slowly, the Ellis family had to face a painful reality. Every theory they'd clung to, every belief they'd fought to keep alive might all be wrong. They began to question themselves. Could Michelle really have left on her own? Was there something in her life they never knew? Or were they simply building a story to avoid feeling powerless to the point of paralysis? That crisis didn't come only from within. It came from the way society reacted to disappearances, like Michelle's. When a black adult goes missing, especially a woman, the media rarely devotes much time to following the story. Many outlets printed just a few lines. A couple of local papers ran a single article, then fell silent. Michelle hadn't just vanished from the physical world. She seemed to have been erased from public concern altogether. To her family, it felt like they were fighting alone, not just to find their daughter, but to defend her right to be remembered. Then one day, a brief conversation at a gas station stirred a new wave of questions. A middle-aged woman claimed she had once seen a young woman who looked strikingly like Michelle at a shelter, nearly 200 miles away, years earlier. She couldn't remember the shelter's name, nor the exact year. She only recalled that the young woman had a sad expression, always carried a small notebook, and would quickly hide it whenever someone came near. When asked why she hadn't reported it at the time, the woman said nothing. Maybe she was afraid. Maybe she thought it wasn't her business. But when she later saw Michelle's photo in an old news desk article, she broke down in tears and decided to reach out. Police took her statement and checked several shelters in that area, but the records were incomplete. Many of the facilities had shut down. Once again, the lead faded into the past. The erosion of trust spread beyond the Ellis family. It reached former teachers, classmates, and neighbors, people who had once shared hope and conversation about Michelle's case, but over time grew hesitant when asked about her. Some avoided the topic to escape the pain of old memories. Others feared being drawn into a case with no clear answers. Yet some still quietly carried fragments of Michelle's presence. An unfinished sketch, a brief chat outside a school gate, the way she once stifled a laugh when a classmate slipped in the courtyard. These fragments, small as they were, proved she had once been here. But as the years passed, even memory began to erode. Around this time, a small nonprofit in Ohio, dedicated to missing women and trafficking victims, reached out to the Ellis family after reviewing Michelle's case. They suggested she might have been a victim of a chantage exploitation network at the time she vanished, particularly given that her disappearance happened in the late 1970s, when many such cases were never properly investigated. They helped the family submit her case to the FBI, requesting a renewed investigation under the possibility of forced transport or being taken across state lines. But with no physical evidence and so much time gone by, the file was acknowledged, but never officially reopened. Once again, the effort ended in silence. Still, the Ellis family continued to speak her name anywhere they were invited, at community meetings, schools, churches. For them, each mention of Michelle was an act of resistance against being forgotten. What they feared most wasn't losing her, it was Michelle becoming just another fading name in an old file, a face no one recognized. Every year on August 2nd, they placed a single white candle beside her photograph in the living room. The flame reflected in her eyes once bright with hope, now seeming to ask, "Do you still remember me?" And from that question, another pain rose to the surface. If Michelle was still alive, did she think her family had given up? Did she believe no one was looking for her anymore? That her voice, even in a brief phone call, had been ignored like an echo with no reply? That question kept her parents awake at night for years. They weren't afraid she had died. They were afraid that if she was alive, she believed she'd been forgotten. Nearly 50 years have passed since the day Michelle vanished. The old house where she once lived now belongs to someone else. The street itself is different. Newer cars in the driveways, freshly painted fences, and neighbors who have come and gone. But in a small corner of the city, inside another modest home, Michelle's parents, now elderly and frail, still keep one room exactly the same. On the desk sits her unfinished artwork, a pastel portrait, its eyes left incomplete. The family once considered asking another artist to finish it, but they stopped because they believe only Michelle would know how. Those eyes should be colored. And as long as the portrait remains unfinished, so does the hope. This is how they hold on to her, not with grand gestures, but with small acts, a painting left incomplete, a window always slightly open, a candle still lit each month. Michelle's story has no ending, but it is not without hope, because each time the story is told, Michelle Ellis is named again. And that is how memory stays alive. Disappearances like hers, especially those involving Black women, are far too easily forgotten by society. But if we keep telling them, keep remembering, keep asking questions, then Michelle is still here, if only in our minds. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this video. If Michelle's story touched your heart, please subscribe so we can continue sharing the stories that they are so often left untold. And if you believe that every person deserves to be remembered, share this video so Michelle's voice is not lost to silence. What do you think really happened to Michelle Ellis on that fateful morning? Do you believe she left by choice? Or do you believe that something or someone caused her to vanish from this life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every opinion is part of the effort to make sure Michelle is never forgotten. And if you feel this story is worth telling, hit like, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe so you can join us in uncovering more unsolved disappearances, especially those overlooked by the media. Comment "me too" if you've ever felt that someone deserves to be remembered, to be found, and to have their story told, even if it's only through words. Thank you for staying until the very last moment. Michelle Ellis, we are still looking for you.